This week you will conduct experiments 1.2 and 1.3. Both of these are in your book. We've created a tutorial video that you're watching right now that will explain how to do everything. So you're going to start by performing experiment 1.2, which is in your book. Page 15. Dr. Weil's book has very specific procedures, but I need you to follow the study place directions right here. First, you summarize the introduction in 2 to 3 sentences in your own words. Next, you'll go through the procedures, and then you'll answer questions on procedures number 5 through 7. Repeat those same procedures for number 8, and then again for number 9 through 11. Once you're done, you're going to make a concluding statement about the importance of factor labeling as part of measurement. And when you do this, you use complete sentences that convey a complete thought. Once you complete the lab, you will then label the experiment as experiment 1.2, cubits and fingers, and you will save it as a Word document in your lab folder within the physical science folder on your desktop, which we made in week 1. You can use the same Word document you used for last week if you want to. Let me show you how to save this into your Word document. Let's say this is your Word document. You go up to File, Save As, and the easiest here would probably be hit Browse, and then look for Desktop. And on the desktop you see the Physical Science folder. Double click on it, and there's the labs. Double click on that, hit Save, and your file is now saved. So just to check, I go on my desktop, there's my Physical Science folder, I double click, there's my labs folder, there's my perform experiment. It should say 1.1, so I'm going to change it. I can change the name, see here, get rid of that, put in experiment 1.1. Click outside, done.
After you finish experiment 1.2, you'll be saving it into this same document, and you should name that document experiment 1.2.
You'll notice here at the bottom of this section it says you will give yourself up to 5 points in the lab poll for doing experiment 1.2. At the end of this week, there will be a 15-point lab poll. 5 points are for what you just did. 10 points will be for what we're going to talk about next. So to take the poll, you would go to Study Place. You can click on Assignments. In this case, I have to go ahead a little bit. You would find Experiment 1.2 and Experiment 1.3, and you'll notice that Take Poll lights up. So you'd click that, and eventually you'll give yourself 15 once you've done Experiment 1.3 checklist, which we're going to talk about next. So don't do it yet. The second lab you're going to do is actually going to be as practice for a formal lab report that we'll be doing in a couple weeks. You will perform Experiment 1.3, which is in your textbook. You follow the procedures in the textbook, pages 17 and 18. However, we found that Alka-Seltzer works better than Tums for this particular experiment. Feel free to use Alka-Seltzer antacid instead of Tums. Make sure that you write which material you used in your rough draft lab report worksheet, which is located down here. You're going to use this. You click on this and it will open the rough draft worksheet. You will complete the rough draft lab report worksheet for experiment 1.3 as a practice for formal lab reports. Fill out all the information on the rough draft worksheet. Spaces provided for all your answers. The lab rubric, which is also down here, rubric for physical science lab reports, is also available if you want to use that for comparison, and then see your lab documents down here below. You're going to want to click on this link right here, number 1, rough draft lab report worksheet. This is the rough draft worksheet, and every student must fill it out individually for their own grade. And it tells you to use 12-point font and 1-inch margins. There's also the formal lab report document to use for detailed instructions, but everything's in this document, so you just follow along. For the font, you go here to 12-point, see it right here, 12. I personally like to use Times New Roman for all my fonts. That's a good professional use. For the margins, you go to Layout, and you see margins over here. Click on margins and you want the 1-inch margins all the way around. Then it is a matter of just completing the worksheet. You go down here, it tells you write a proper heading. So replace name with your name. Mr. Ream or Mr. Risen, put the class, day and time, put the date in, and you have what you need. Put in the title, Experiment 1.3. You can also give it a specific name like concentration or something. For purpose, as with each section, there are directions to follow.
Every section will have a title for that section, so you would write purpose at the left margin, leaving 1 space below the title. And then you'll put the purpose, which is to describe what the lab is intended to accomplish. What is the question at hand, or what is the problem to solve?
Then there's background information. This would include any major physical science concepts that you're studying, just a brief definition. And then you come up with a hypothesis, which this explains what that hypothesis would be. Let me give you a glimpse of what your lab report's going to look like. You can see here you have the heading up here, you have your title, you have your purpose with something written, background indented with something written, hypothesis indented with something written. You need equipment. And remember, for experiment 1.3, you're going to replace Tums with Alka-Seltzer tablets. And then you write a step-by-step list of procedures, which you used from the book in this case. For data and observations or calculations in data, you will include detailed observations of what you experienced or observed in the lab, what you saw, heard, smelled when the experiment was performed. However, don't retell procedures in this section. Include all data tables and or charts that support your observations. Label all items and all categories. Provide an organized table of all measurements during the lab activity if it's appropriate. You don't have to do a table if there's no data. The table must have clear headings. All measurements must include units. The table should be arranged in an orderly fashion so it's easy for someone to read. They can read it quickly, compare different trials, and grasp the scope and outcome of the experiment. Make sure you include a picture, drawing, or sketch of the setup of the experiment. There are no calculations necessary in this lab, and neither is a graph necessary. So this next part here you would use for future experiments. When you come to the conclusions section, you'll notice that all the sections have a statement that says write, in this case, conclusions at the left margin, leaving one space below the calculation section. That's an important organizational thing for your lab report. The conclusions section has several parts. The first part is that you draw a conclusion or make a concluding statement by restating and addressing your hypothesis. What does that mean? You state whether your hypothesis was correct or incorrect in a complete sentence that includes the original hypothesis. And second, you explain why your hypothesis was correct or not using the observations and data from the lab. Next, you provide in-depth analysis of the data and observations in the lab. Your analysis is a summary that should include the major concepts or scientific principles in a sequential manner. These are not procedures, but explanations. All the explanations of the lab go here. Prove by the use of data or supporting evidence from the lab that you understand the scientific principles or concepts that were demonstrated in the lab. For instance, you can explain using scientific principles from the lab why you got the results you did. Keep asking yourself why and how things worked as they did, thinking about the big picture. Why this experiment and the results are important to science and how they are applicable to other fields. You can use outside resources. We encourage that. Journals, websites, physical science-related books, the text. But do not copy verbatim when explaining science. Use your own words. But you must also cite these references that you use and include them in the bibliography. The next section, you answer any questions that are included in the lab by numbering them and making statements using complete sentences that convey a complete scientific thought. You must provide supporting evidence or data from the lab for each conclusion and conclusion question. The last section of the conclusions are to include errors, which would be human error, experimental error, materials you didn't have or had that you had to change, procedural errors that were encountered. Note why these errors occurred and how the error changed the result. Consider potential errors that would be made in a real-life situation. Sometimes your lab came out perfect. Well, what kind of errors could have happened? Offer any ideas for further related study and research of this topic or scientific principle, especially if you found an error that, if you corrected it, would make the lab work better. The very last section of the lab report is a bibliography or resource section. Write the word bibliography at the left margin, one space below the conclusion section. All your references, all your resources or bibliography must be done in MLA format. 2 really good websites to help you understand what these are, or you could use easybib.com, and there's many others. But I've also given you examples here. You must include the following 3 references as a minimum. For instance, Citation 1. You can use your textbook or another book resource. And here is the MLA format for your textbook, so you can use that. Citation 2, let's say that you reference something from a website in your lab report. This would be a proper way of showing a web URL. Citation 3, if you use directions from StudyPlace or from one of the documents on StudyPlace, then you need to document that. And here is the MLA format for documenting something that came from Study Place. To cite a web search engine like Google, Yahoo, or Wikipedia is not acceptable. You need to be very specific. Your bibliography would actually look like this when you're done. If I took those same 3 citations, you'd notice alphabetically, Aris stuff goes first, then Study Place, then Dr. Weil would be last alphabetically. Remember, you're going to have to change the dates and everything based on what you actually use. Because Experiment 1.3 is a practice for future lab reports, we're going to do something special. So we'll go down through this list. First of all, you're going to download the lab report checklist worksheet. That is right here. Go ahead and click on that and download it, and you're going to use this. Once you've completed the rough draft worksheet that I just went through thoroughly on this video, you're going to have another person. That could be a classmate, it could be a guardian, or a responsible adult. So you can do this at home, or you could do it with a classmate in a study room. You're going to go over your rough draft report worksheet, Experiment 1.3, using the lab report checklist. This is the lab report checklist. This is the assignment that's worth 10 points in the poll that you're going to have. The instructions are simple. You're going to go through your rough draft that you made with this checklist, and you're going to check off everything as you go. So first of all, did you put it in 12 font and Times New Roman or Arial font? Do you have 1-inch margins? Avoid using personal pronouns like I, my, you. Do you have the proper heading, and so forth? You go down through, do you have the title? Notice I'm putting an X in all these. Do you have the purpose? Did you write the word purpose on the left? Did you describe what the problem is and all that, all the way through the lab? Complete the checklist with an adult or a classmate or your parent. All these should be checked off when you're done. So you go to Study Place, you open that up, and here's your messages. But you want to click on the assignments icon, and that will open. And you're going to scroll down until you get to the Experiment 1.2 and 1.3 poll. And you notice that Take Poll lights up. You click on that. It'll say give yourself up to 5 points for Experiment 1.2 and up to 10 points for Experiment 1.3. And it continues to say up to 15 points total. So you would give yourself 15 points and hit Submit Answer. And then you're all done. It's important that you read everything that's on Study Place, because that's where your directions are. If you look here, you see Rough Draft Lab Report. Use the checklist review to make any necessary edits on your Rough Draft Lab Report. This is actually for next week. When you're satisfied that your Rough Draft Lab Report is complete, sometime next week, not this week, go to the assignments just like I showed you, submit file, in the final draft 50 points assignment. One final reminder is that you need to go through your rough draft and get rid of all the directions after you have your lab stuff done. So you'll want to delete all these directions here, which will leave you with the heading. You don't need where it says write proper heading, but you'll have your heading there. See, get rid of all the directions. Once you have the title in place, you'll get rid of all these directions, see, like this. So just the title remains. Put purpose on the left side, indent background as I showed you before, but get rid of all the directions. So you have Experiment 1.2, Experiment 1.3, which make up the lab poll for this week of 15 points total. Then next week, you'll complete the rough draft lab report that will be turned in for a grade by the teacher.